And do you know Mr. and Mrs. Astor?
Good evening, madam.
Oh, and a touch of glamour at your table. You'll have heard of Miss Dorothy Gibson.
Oh, I doubt it. Why should folks like you care about my crazy job? And this is my mother.
Hello. Miss Gibson, the film star.
And Miss...
Imagine hearing the cries and screams of horror from people who you know will surely sink to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean as you sit safely in a lifeboat. Now imagine being in that lifeboat with death all around you and having one concern on your mind, and it is, I'll never be able to wear all of my new clothes from Paris. They sank with the Titanic. If you were Dorothy Gibson, you wouldn't have to imagine it. That's one of the many selfish thoughts that went through her head and even came out of her mouth as 1,500 people were in the midst of losing their lives while she made her way safely onto a lifeboat that was never even loaded to full capacity. In our modern times, many of us can't help but to think of James Cameron's Titanic film when we think of the actual 1912 sinking. Its big names and big budget special effects and set certainly made it a spectacle for the eye to remember. Yet, Titanic historians, and survivors when they were alive, preferred the 1958 film called A Night to Remember for its historical authenticity. It is often called the first Titanic movie, but it's not. The first Titanic movie was called Saved from the Titanic, and it was released in May of 1912, just 4 weeks after the disaster occurred. And its star was our Dorothy Gibson, the girl who was so sad about losing her brand new Parisian fashions in the wee morning hours of April 15th, 1912. She was a silent film actress, and this role was going to make her a bigger star than she already was. And the movie was made by her lover, a man who was married to another woman. But you know how the saying goes, whatever is done in the dark will come to the light. And the way that this adulterous affair came to be known by the public was a scandal in and of itself. Dorothy's story has it all: sexual affairs, crazy court cases, a man in a nightgown, a homicide, and a stay in a Nazi concentration camp. This is the story of one of the most self-absorbed first-class passengers who boarded the Titanic, silent film actress Dorothy Gibson. She was a total hot mess. Let's get into it. But first, if you like these videos about the most scandalous people from yesteryear who make Ty's Hot Mess History a time capsule for the culture, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can know every time that I upload content. And please hit that thumbs up to support this video for free. Thank you. Now, on to why you are here. Dorothy Gibson was born Dorothy Winifred Brown on May 17, 1889 in Hoboken, New Jersey. Her father was John A. Brown. He died when she was only 3 years old. Her mother was Pauline Caroline Boson, and she remained in Dorothy's life until she died. Until Dorothy died, that is. Dorothy's mother, Pauline, ended up outliving Dorothy. Her mother didn't waste any time when it came to marrying again. Pauline was always looking for a way to climb up, so any old man just wouldn't do. When she caught the attention of an affluent merchant named John Leonard Gibson, she knew that he was the one. She married him before Dorothy turned 5. And it was through this marriage that Dorothy received the surname Gibson, the name that she would use in her stage and film career that made her a household name in America, Dorothy Gibson. John Gibson, though he had a large amount of money, was a sensible man and didn't feel the need to spend a lot or show off what he had. Pauline was the opposite, and she reared Dorothy to be the same as she, frivolous when it came to spending money and having an appetite for the finer things in life. This created a divided household, John standing alone against mother and daughter. Pauline was rearing Dorothy to be a bit of a spoiled brat. Here's how Dorothy described their relationship dynamic after she became famous. Quote, "My father is a great man of the spirit and is contented with the simple life. But I and my mother are bohemian, and we find the pleasures of this lovely world irresistible." End quote. So let's talk about her path to fame. In 1906, the Gibson family moved from New Jersey to Manhattan, where Dorothy was introduced to the theater, and she became obsessed. She wanted to be on stage too. And what Dorothy wanted, Pauline saw to it that Dorothy got. By the time Dorothy was 17, her mother had her on stage, dancing, acting, and singing in vaudeville productions. It is impossible to tell Dorothy's story without frequently mentioning her mother, Pauline. Pauline was a stage mother of the worst kind. As a very young girl, men took notice of Dorothy's good looks, and her mother didn't mind pimping out her daughter if it was to her own advantage. So Pauline managed Dorothy's career. Under Pauline's management, Dorothy became a regular chorus girl at the Hippodrome Theater. And Dorothy also made it to Broadway to perform in a musical called The Dairymaids. That was considered to be a pivotal moment in her career. After the musical, she started getting noticed for bigger opportunities. In 1909, a famous commercial artist wanted to work with Dorothy. His name was Harrison Fisher, and I want to give you a little background information on him. Chances are that if you're interested in this side of history, you're already familiar with Charles Dana Gibson. He was a commercial artist who got his start in the 1880s. He became famous for drawing The Gibson Girl, an iconic illustration that was said to have portrayed American beauty at its best. His Gibson Girl images were everywhere, and Charles Gibson worked for decades in his field. As Gibson's fame was dying out, Harrison Fisher was just getting started, and he had a new ideal in mind for the American beauty standard, and it was Dorothy Gibson. After seeing her perform at the Hippodrome Theater, he went backstage to meet her and asked her if she would sit as a model for him. She was beyond flattered at the notion, so of course she accepted. And their collaboration made her more famous than she had ever dreamed she could be. Charles Dana's Gibson Girl was a thing of the past. The new thing now was the Harrison Fisher Girl. And that's what they called Dorothy, the original Harrison Fisher Girl. And I think that it's such a quirky coincidence that the Gibson Girl was replaced by a girl whose name actually was Gibson, but she became known as the Fisher Girl. Now, because of Fisher, Dorothy Gibson was booking modeling gigs. She would sit for his drawing sessions, and he used her face on product labels, in book illustrations, on postcards, and she was even on the cover of women's magazines like Ladies' Home Journal and Cosmopolitan. Her face was everywhere, and she was legitimately famous. And she didn't understand why. Dorothy knew that she was pretty, but she had seen Fisher's other models and thought that they were prettier than she. Here's how she described her confusion about becoming his most famous model. Quote, "I was fortunate to be discovered, in a manner of speaking, by Mr. Fisher, but he had many models, and some of them were far prettier than I was. I do not know what he saw in me." End quote. Well, I think that's just the thing. Fisher wasn't exactly drawing Dorothy. Here's what I mean. Dorothy was his palette or starting template, but he wouldn't draw her exactly as he saw her or exactly the way she looked. This sounds creepy to me, but he would draw Dorothy in a way that made her look both younger and more sexualized at the same time. Like if he were around today, authorities might be interested in seeing just what he was looking at online, if you catch my drift. To accomplish the sultry and childlike look he was going for, he would soften the shape of her nose, extend the space between her eyes, and slightly lift her jaw. The June 1911 edition of Cosmopolitan displays this style and is analyzed by Andrew Wilson in Shadow of the Titanic, who points out that Dorothy is drawn, quote, drinking sarsaparilla from a tall glass, her long fingers caressing its base, the lips of her rosebud mouth closed around the straw. Dorothy's mix of ingenue innocence and barely concealed sexual energy was a winning combination for the illustrator, end quote. By the way, while Dorothy's star was rising as a model, she got married to George Henry Battier Jr., a young pharmacist who was near her age. He exists as a mere footnote in the story of her life, and their marriage didn't last long. We'll get there. After making her mark on the stage and in the world of commercial modeling, Dorothy looked on to the next venture. And it was film. The movie industry was still in its very early stages in the 1910s, and in 1911, Dorothy entered the industry as an extra, getting in on the ground floor. Before the year was over, she had been hired as a leading lady for the U.S. branch of Eclair Studios, a Paris-based movie studio. Their American operations were in New Jersey. And in that same year, Eclair debuted its first film. It was an historical drama called Hands Across the Sea. Dorothy played the role of Molly Pitcher, and the debut was a success. But later that year, the studio would find Dorothy's real strength, and it wasn't in playing a serious, dramatic character. Dorothy shined in comedy. Miss Masquerader was Dorothy's next role, and it was a hit for her and the studio. She received positive reviews for her acting, with critics writing that she had a natural talent for pulling off comedy in film. Dorothy's fame had certainly reached new heights after her Miss Masquerader film was released. But after surviving the Titanic disaster, her most famous role ever would come about as a direct result of having traveled on the doomed liner. The film was called Saved from the Titanic, and it was based on her own experience. Loosely, very loosely. So how did Dorothy Gibson even wind up on the Titanic in the first place? It was actually she and her mother. They had been enjoying a European vacation that was supposed to have lasted for 3 months. It got cut short when Dorothy received a call from her studio telling her that she needed to return home to start filming a new series of movies. When she learned that the Titanic was the first ship headed back home, she booked first-class tickets for her mother and herself to get on it. Pretty straightforward. But why was she in Europe? Yeah, sure, she was on vacation, and everybody needs a break from time to time. But there was another reason that Dorothy had taken this vacation, and it wasn't innocent at all. Jules Brulatour was a producer at Eclair Studios and one of the most powerful men in the budding film industry. He was Dorothy's boss, and he provided the financial backing for a number of her films. He was also Dorothy's lover. The main problem with this was that he was a married man, and he didn't mind hiding money from his wife and using it to shower Dorothy with expensive presents. He was interested in Dorothy from the moment he met her at a film industry gala in 1911. He told her that night that he felt like he already knew her because he had seen her lovely photos in all of the newspapers. Dorothy's mother, Pauline, loved the attention and the money and the material things that Dorothy and she got as a result of this illicit affair, so she pushed for it to continue. Pauline didn't want to miss out on anything that she could get from her daughter opening her legs to this married man. But you know how these things usually go. The married man enters the affair wanting sex. The woman enters wanting marriage. That was the case with this affair. Dorothy wanted marriage, and so did her mother. Pauline's thought was, if he's doing all this for you as a mistress, just think of what we can get if he marries you. Mind you, at this time, Dorothy was earning $175 per week. Adjusted for inflation, that's a little over $12,000 per week in today's 2024 money. So Dorothy was not hurting financially in any way. But enough was a word that wasn't in her mother's vocabulary. Pauline knew that Dorothy could get a lot more money if she could marry Jules and have access to his fortune. For months, she had already been arranging the meetings for Dorothy to have sex with Jules. During the daytime, they were at the studio. He was Mr. Brulatour, and she was Dorothy. But at nighttime, they were at the St. Regis Hotel, and he was her Julie, and she was his Mutsy. Lovey-dovey nicknames. How stupid. So Pauline just came up with one more scheme to get this pair of lovers together forever. In a nutshell, the plan was to make Jules miss Dorothy so much that he would realize that he wanted to marry her. Pauline told Dorothy to ask for some time off so that she could take a vacation to Europe. She was given the time off. Then Dorothy and Pauline made their way to Europe. They had a 3-month itinerary that included several stops in European countries and North Africa. They set sail on March 17, 1912. The whole time they were gone, Pauline was coaching Dorothy on what to say in telegram messages to Jules that were sent to his office at the studio. Tell him that you bought a sexy dress in Monaco and you can't wait for him to see you in it. Tell him you bought some naughty lingerie in Paris and you can't wait to wear it for him. Tell him all the things that you want to do for him in the bedroom. We're all adults here. We know that she wasn't talking about folding his laundry in the bedroom. It all sounds so straightforward. Too straightforward and way too aggressive for a woman, especially in that era. But guess what? It worked. Dorothy's absence, coupled with her sexy messages, had her on Jules' mind day and night. And he was ready to leave his wife to marry Dorothy. On April 8th, Dorothy received a telegram at her hotel in Genoa. It was from her studio, telling her that she needed to return home ASAP. Not because Jules was ready to marry her. That would come later. This telegram was about business. It was time to film a new series of silent films, and they needed her at work. So it was settled, and Dorothy and Pauline would be on their way back to America only 3 weeks into their 3-month trip. Dorothy made a quick stop in France, and she was able to book a ticket on some ship called the Titanic. That's all that she knew about it. It was her quickest way to get home. Dorothy had no idea that 2 days after getting that telegram, that she and her mother would soon be aboard the largest and most luxurious vessel that had ever sailed. On April 10th, they were on the Titanic. And just like every other passenger on that liner, Dorothy and Pauline were having a grand old time until trouble struck on April 14th at 11:40 p.m. Thankfully, because Dorothy was so famous and a lot of people wanted to hear what she had to say about her time on Titanic, we have a lot of information about what happened to her. So let me tell you about Dorothy's last night on the Ship of Dreams. Dorothy and Pauline were in the saloon on Deck A, playing bridge with a couple of friends they'd made from first class. 2 men, Frederick Seward, a marine lawyer, and William Sloper, a stockbroker. As Dorothy remembered it, there was, quote, a great deal of merriment on board, end quote. Then they felt something, a slight jar, as she put it. But of course, they didn't stop the game. There was nothing to worry about. They were on an unsinkable ship. Well, every ship is unsinkable until it sinks. And before Dorothy's card game was over, it became clear the Titanic was going down. According to Dorothy, after feeling that movement, she and the other bridge players carried on playing and laughing for another 15 minutes before she realized that something was amiss. When she looked up from her card hand, she finally noticed the ship's stewards and officers. As she retold the story, they were moving with considerable nervousness. But then, still nothing was registering that serious danger was just minutes away. Dorothy said goodnight to her table and went outside for a walk on the deck. And that's when she saw that Titanic was listing. As she put it, the great ship was leaning heavily on one side. Then she noticed that other passengers didn't notice. She stepped back into the saloon to find everyone having a blast, enjoying that beautiful night, playing cards, talking, laughing, and drinking. Then finally, the group of card players learned that what they felt earlier was the ship colliding with an iceberg, and now it was time to get to safety. And they all did so with relative ease, including the men in her party. At 12:45 a.m., an hour and 5 minutes after the collision, the first distress signal rocket was fired. Anyone who hadn't got the message likely understood by this point the time for fun and games was over. Officers on the starboard side of the ship were ready to launch the first lifeboat. Now, there was a commotion and panic filled the air. Dorothy and Pauline weren't even in control of the directions their bodies were going, as a crowd surge came about and people were just leaning into each other, trying their best to get off the boat that just days before, almost everybody in the world wanted to get on. Somehow, Dorothy and her mother managed to hold on to each other and not get disconnected. And Dorothy didn't mind being pushed around the way that she was, because she could see that she was being pushed in the direction of where the lifeboats were to be lowered. Frederick and William helped Dorothy and Pauline into a lifeboat. Then, as gentlemen would have been expected to do, they turned away to make a path for more women and potentially children to enter the lifeboat. Well, Dorothy grabbed William's hand and refused to let go. She insisted to the officer in charge that he allow her two male friends to get into the lifeboat. The one thing that there wasn't time for was an argument, so the officer let the two men get in with Dorothy so that he could get about the business of trying to save some more lives. They were joined by the Bishops, a couple from Detroit who were on their honeymoon. Yes, most of us are familiar with the phrase, women and children first, in reference to the loading of the lifeboats in this tragedy, but that's what it was. Women and children first, not women and children only. Dorothy and her fellow passengers were in lifeboat number 7, the first lifeboat that was launched. It was lowered into the water and made its escape from the calamity. I won't say that it was the first lifeboat that was filled, because it wasn't full. It sailed away from the Titanic with only 28 people in it, 25 first-class passengers, and 3 Titanic crew members. Now, brace yourself. The lifeboat had a capacity to hold 65. Here's a quick side note that I thought you might like. This lifeboat, number 7, almost carried 2 pregnant teen wives. The lady in the honeymooning couple from Michigan was 19 years old and had conceived on her honeymoon. John Jacob Astor, the richest man on the Titanic, tried to get his 18-year-old pregnant wife in this lifeboat too, Madeline Astor, but she was too afraid to try to get in and decided to stay on Titanic with her husband until much later. And since I've given you one side note, allow me to give you another one. Guess who helped Dorothy and her mother and dozens of passengers into the lifeboats on the starboard side of Titanic? He is the man who walked away from this catastrophe with a reputation for being the biggest coward on board, Bruce Ismay. In real life, and in James Cameron's Titanic, he is the man who was depicted as sneaking into a lifeboat, then lowering his head in shame as his lifeboat was lowered into the water. But back to Dorothy and lifeboat number 7. Knowing that the ocean liner only had enough lifeboats for roughly a third of its passengers to begin with, makes this number of 28 passengers in lifeboat number 7 seem all the more disgusting. Everyone in number 7 was rescued, but not without a hiccup or two. A problem arose while the 28 were getting loaded in. The drainage plug in the bottom of the boat somehow got displaced. As Dorothy recalled, women aboard offered up their lingerie items, and men offered up some of their clothing items to stuff in the hole. Obviously, these various pieces of cloth didn't provide a tight seal, so icy water started seeping into the bottom of the boat, but just a tiny bit at a time. Still, it was enough to completely cover their feet for the next few hours. As someone who absolutely hates being in cold temperatures, I can only imagine how dreadful those few hours were for them, but I'm sure that they were able to look just as far as their eyes could see and realize that they were still in an enviable position. Yes, their feet were cold, bone-chillingly cold, but hundreds of people around them were freezing to death and drowning. As Dorothy put it, quote, "I never knew one could be so cold and live. I ached from head to foot, and I was much more warmly clad than some of the women," end quote. Dorothy was wearing an evening dress that night. She had a sweater and a short overcoat on top of her dress. And when she said that she had on more clothes than other women, that wasn't a judgment call suggesting that the other women were dressed inappropriately. No, many of the other women were dressed for bed on a ship that wasn't supposed to sink. Many of these women were in bed for the night before the ship hit the iceberg. And even when they stepped out of their cabins to learn about the commotion that was going on around them, a lot of them just went back to their beds for the night, thinking, "Oh, the crew will fix it." So by the time it became clear to everyone that there was a serious emergency underway, it was too late for those women to put on warm clothes. They had one job only, and it was to get off of the Titanic alive. Right around 2 o'clock in the morning, it finally became obvious to Lifeboat Number 7 passengers that most of Titanic's passengers were not going to escape from the ship. George Hogg, one of the crew members on Number 7, ordered that their lifeboat be rowed away from Titanic because the risk of being sucked down with it was high. So those 3 crew members and passengers did as he said and rowed away from Titanic as hard and quickly as they could. Dorothy's eyes were focused on Titanic, which at this point was partially underwater with its stern up in the air before its final plunge. This is what Dorothy said happened next. Quote, "Suddenly, there was a wild coming together of voices from the ship, and we noticed an unusual commotion among the people about the railing. Then the awful thing happened, the thing that will remain in my memory until the day I die." End quote. Dorothy was able to get in the first lifeboat that launched. That means that she had a shorter time to panic about getting to safety than most of the people on the ship. And of course, we know that many who were panicking never made it to safety. But even in that short time that Dorothy had to wait for her half-empty lifeboat to drift her out of harm's way, she still found time to think one selfish thought. As her fellow passengers were scrambling on the decks, looking for loved ones, looking for life jackets, trying to find their way into lifeboats, Dorothy's thought was this, and she said it: "I'll never get to ride in that gray car again." Now, when I first read this, I thought that perhaps Dorothy was disoriented and having some type of mental breakdown. But no, she knew exactly what she was saying. She was talking about the gray Detroit automobile made by Chalmers that her boyfriend had bought for her. It was a fancy car that she loved to drive. And as the Titanic was starting to sink, that's where Dorothy's mind went. Woe is me, I'll never get to drive my favorite car again. But we know that she would get to drive her favorite car again. Dorothy and her fellow passengers in Lifeboat Number 7 spent a long, dark, cold morning in the Atlantic before they were rescued. There was talk amongst them about how horrifying the screams were of the people who had not been so fortunate to find their way into lifeboats. That led to another conversation that was quickly shut down. "Hey, our lifeboat isn't full. Let's go back and get some more passengers." That was the sentiment of one of the crew members. Well, he was outnumbered 27-1. "We can't go back. What if our boat gets pulled under? What if too many people try to get on our boat? They'll all be fine. They can get on their own lifeboats." The crew member then informed the 25 passengers that he knew for a fact that there weren't enough lifeboats for every passenger who had booked a ticket, and some of them would surely sink with the ship or freeze in the ocean. That didn't change anyone's mind. They sat there in lifeboat number 7 and listened to the screams and cries until they stopped. The survivors on lifeboat number 7 were slightly inconvenienced when some of the icy water started to enter their little craft, but they managed. The coldness in the air was nearly unbearable, especially for the women who had just hours before been perfectly comfortable in their dresses and nightgowns. At some point, after most of the passengers who were floating in the water were surely dead, another dreadful thought entered Dorothy's mind. All of those beautiful pieces that she'd bought in Europe for her lover to see. The clothes that were going to make Jules leave his wife for her. They were at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Oh no, my beautiful new dresses and lingerie. I'm not joking. These are words that she shared about her Titanic experience. The passengers on lifeboat number 7 then listened as hundreds of people were submerged into their icy grave. Dorothy said that it was a mixture of yells, shrieks, and moans. And then, under the water, they could hear and feel explosions. These were most likely from the stern imploding as it sank. It had to have been horrifying for everyone. But after all of the talk about all of the cries and moans of the people who weren't able to get into a lifeboat, one could only wonder how sorry Dorothy and the other 27 people in lifeboat number 7 truly were. Did they feel badly enough to do something? To help? Well, listen to this. The crew member who told them to row away from Titanic so that they wouldn't go under with her was the lookout, George Hogg. And after the Unsinkable sank, he was the one who wanted to turn lifeboat number 7 around, have the passengers row back to the spot of the sinking to pick up some more survivors. He knew, as anyone should have known, that they wouldn't last long in the icy waters. But when he told the passengers of lifeboat number 7 his suggestion to go back and pick up people who were surely freezing to death, every single person in number 7 objected, Dorothy included. Now you tell me, how badly did she really feel? How badly did they really feel? I'm sorry, but there is just no good excuse for this. Every lifeboat should have been filled to capacity. When Dorothy was asked why her lifeboat didn't turn around to pick up passengers, she couldn't quite find the words to explain that to the press. I bet she couldn't. Less than a week after the tragedy, Dorothy's account was published and it was full of contradictions. First, she said that after Titanic disappeared, she could see bobbing heads all around in the water. Then later, she says in that same time frame that no one could be seen in the water. Even if a bit of sense could have been made out of her timeline, it displayed a window of opportunity to save some more lives. I'm telling you, she knew what she and her first-class ticket-holding cohorts had done was wrong and unjustifiable. And I want to make it very clear that Dorothy was not the only one or even the main one to blame. She just so happens to be our subject today, so my focus is on her. I'm looking forward to telling you the stories of everyone in lifeboat number 7 and as many Titanic passengers as I can, if you'll allow me to. But it's Dorothy's turn today. These post-Titanic interviews in which she told half-truths, lies, and contradictions laid the groundwork for the script that she would write for her Titanic movie, If she had told the American public the truth about how she and her fellow survivors conducted themselves, she would surely lose her status as America's sweetheart. Lifeboat number 7, having only 28 passengers in it, isn't even half of the story. Oh no, this is like an awful infomercial, because wait, there's more. Herbert Pittman was the Titanic crew member in charge of lifeboat number 5. While drifting in the early morning, he saw Dorothy's lifeboat and called out to its passengers. When he got close enough to see that lifeboat number 7 only had 28 passengers, he felt like his own lifeboat was crowded. It held 40. All of the lifeboats were designed to hold 65. When Pittman got close enough, he put some of the survivors from his lifeboat onto Dorothy's. Then crew members tied both of the lifeboats together. Why? So that they could go back together and scoop up as many survivors as possible? Hell no, don't be silly. They tied their two boats together so that they would be more visible to their rescue vessel. Combined, they had enough space to save 62 more people from freezing to death, but instead, they only looked out for the ones who were already safe. This time, no one even suggested going to rescue more people. And this was about the time that Dorothy started to feel sad. For herself. Here's how Titanic researcher Andrew Wilson wrote about it. Quote, "In that freezing, uncomfortable boat, she began to feel sorry for herself. She remembered some of the clothes she had bought in Paris just before she had traveled to Cherbourg, garments she had chosen to captivate and titillate her older lover. There was the beautiful afternoon dress, the color of champagne, the pink blouse, a vision of lace and chiffon. And then there were those silk stockings and risque lingerie sets she had packed away in her trunks, all of which now lay at the bottom of the ocean." End quote. Then she thought of Jules, of course, and how much she loved that married man. There were their messages back and forth to each other. "Will do everything, make you completely happy. Love you madly, Julie." Remember, we're talking about telegrams here, so all of the words weren't always included. Another one of his telegrams. "It caused no happiness without Mutsy. Never allow you leave again, Julie." To which she replied, "Hardly wait get back. Cable made me awfully happy. Mutsy." Yeah, sure, she'd be happy to get back to see him, but it just wouldn't be the same without her brand new clothes. But oh yeah, people were dead and still dying. Dorothy actually had a discussion on the lifeboat with her friend from the bridge game, William, about all of the people who had died. But Dorothy, refusing to look guilty about it, in front of a man who was right there with her and just as guilty as she, continued to say whatever she could to help them all feel better about looking at themselves in the mirror. She told William that hardly any people would be dead because surely most of the passengers got away in lifeboats. We all know that that wasn't true. Chances are Dorothy also knew that was a lie when she said it. But one of the Titanic crew members quickly put that lie to rest when he interjected and said, "Even if all of the lifeboats were filled, not more than a third on Titanic could have escaped." That reality brought lifeboats number 5 and number 7 to silence. There was coldness, death, and stillness in the atmosphere for the next few hours. Then roughly at 6 a.m., the RMS Carpathia arrived to rescue those who had survived through the wee hours of the morning. Lifeboat number 7 was the third to have its passengers loaded onto Carpathia. Dorothy met a kind couple who offered her space in their cabin, which she gladly accepted. After eating breakfast, she retired to their room and slept for 26 hours straight. After waking up, the first thing on her mind was her man. Not her husband. She was still married to what's-his-name, but I'm talking about Jules. She wanted to send him a telegram, but she had a long wait. You can imagine how many people were trying to get messages home. Well, on April 17th, she got a telegram from him that read, "Will be worried to death till I hear from you. What awful agony. Julie." Having nothing except the clothes on her back, she had to borrow money to send him a short reply. In case you didn't know, people were charged per each letter or character when they sent telegrams. So she kept her reply short and sweet, and professional, since it was going to his home, where his wife could easily intercept it. It simply read, "Safe, picked up by Carpathia. Don't worry, Dorothy." Then finally, the next day, actually the next night, on April 18th, the Carpathia arrived in New York, delayed due to bad weather. It was 9:25 p.m. and very dark outside, but that did not stop the Titanic Welcome Committee from waiting to see their loved ones get off of their rescue vessel. And Jules Brulatour, being the shrewd businessman he was, didn't miss out on an opportunity to capitalize even on this moment. He made sure to have his movie camera rolling for the triumphant return of his mistress. Within the next few days, he had the reel spinning in theaters across the country, and he was making a lot of money because of it. This let him know that he was on to something when it came to the other idea that had been in the back of his mind since he heard about the Titanic going down. A movie about the Titanic disaster, starring his mistress. That was just what the people would want to see. There is this perception that people who lived during the Edwardian period or the Gilded Age, whatever you call it on your side of the globe, lived a much more wholesome way than we do today. And I'm here to tell you that that is simply not true. They just didn't have reality TV and Jerry Springer back then. No spaces existed where they could flaunt the worst of their behaviors. But despite their classy suits and elegant dresses, they too lived scandalous lives, and the general public back then had an appetite for scandal, just as we do today. And Jules knew that he could make another small fortune by filling their movie screens with a bit of human exploitation. He would run the idea by Dorothy as soon as he got a chance to have a quiet moment with her. When Dorothy and Pauline disembarked, there were a lot of loved ones and press members waiting to see them. Dorothy was interviewed by several reporters. She told one, quote, "The concerted cry of despair that came from the direction of the liner as she plunged into the ocean is ringing in my ear this minute. I cannot describe it. It sounded like a mighty wail." End quote. Waiting for Dorothy and Pauline were Dorothy's stepfather, her aunt, who was her mother's sister, and even some friends from their neighborhood in New Jersey. Leonard Gibson, Pauline's husband and Dorothy's stepfather, greeted the ladies with a big hug, then whisked the entire party off to a celebratory dinner that lasted until early the next morning. The whole time she was thinking about Jules. She wanted to get away from her family and friends so that she could see her lover. And she did. She took a taxi to her apartment. I don't know how she got inside. I suspect that she didn't have her keys. At any rate, she tidied herself up and then went to a hotel to meet Jules. And she was finally in her gray car that she had been daydreaming about on the Titanic. Again, I don't know how she had the key. Maybe the car key was already in her apartment. Car keys were just becoming a thing in 1910, and I have a feeling that this would have been a newer car, but who knows? Maybe it didn't need a key. Please forgive the tangent, but my mind really did wonder about how she was able to get back into her apartment and car after midnight. Well, Jules was excited to see Dorothy. And guess what? He had a proposal waiting for her that night. A new film project proposal. "Dorothy, you should have seen how crazy things were here. We had Titanic fever in America. Everybody would want to see your survival story. It would make you crazy famous. What do you say, Mutsy?" She said yes. I tell you, that Jules wasn't one of the leading men in his industry for no reason. But he had another proposal for Dorothy that night. This one came with a $1,000 diamond cluster ring. "Will you marry me, even though I'm still married with 3 children and not even close to getting a legal separation?" She said yes. Sure, a lot of people were sad because they'd lost loved ones who they'd never see again, but Titanic was a win-win situation for Dorothy. Getting on that boat won her the movie role of a lifetime and the man of her dreams. Her thoughts? You know, it really does suck for you all, but everything is going my way, so you should all just be happy about that and come see my new movie. You know that this isn't going to end well for her, right? The conversation that Dorothy had with William before they were rescued by Carpathia brings us back to her post-Titanic interviews. Dorothy told the press that she behaved as a lady should have. She was offered a seat on a lifeboat, and she took it. End of story, period. Well, William Sloper, her bridge-playing friend, said, but, that was not the end of the story. He liked Dorothy, and to some degree could say that she saved his life. But he told the media what Dorothy said on Titanic as people started shuffling around to get on lifeboats. He said Dorothy, quote, kept repeating over and over so that people standing near us could hear her, "I'll never ride in my little gray car again," end quote. William let the people know that America's sweetheart was obsessed with her material items while people were trying to save their lives. Why did he feel the need to share this? It may have been because his name was getting dragged in the mud over an embarrassing lie, and he didn't want to go down alone, so he decided to take down his card-playing friend with him. You might want to know what was said about William. Well, I found this article from the April 19th Buffalo Courier, from just days after the disaster. It says that William Sloper was rescued from Titanic because he was mistaken for a woman, because he was wearing a woman's nightgown. Now, this was not true at all, but I can imagine that William was pretty upset about it. The thought is that this story was printed about William because he didn't want to talk to reporters after the sinking. He wouldn't give anyone an interview, so they just started making up stuff about him. Well, their plan worked. It got him to talk. Then eventually, he cleared his name and left a stain on Dorothy's that no one denied. But Dorothy didn't have time to worry about her lies being exposed in newspapers. She had a movie to make. The movies that Dorothy was originally returning to film got put on the back burner. She and Jules got straight to work on this Titanic project. Saved from the Titanic. Very clever name, I know. Dorothy came up with the storyline, Jules secured the filming location, and even came up with the bright idea to have her wear the same clothing she had worn that night and early morning on the ill-fated ship. You know, for authenticity. Dorothy was so excited to work on this production. We can't know for certain what was truly motivating her. Was it that she trusted Jules when he said that this movie was going to make her more famous than she already was? Or was it something less self-serving? Was this movie a vehicle for her to deal with her trauma? Was she just excited about the big payday that she knew was coming? Maybe it was a little bit of all of that. The story that she wrote for herself allowed her to be a better version of Dorothy than the real Dorothy. In her movie, her character's name was Dorothy. Dorothy was coming back home on the Titanic to reunite with her boyfriend, Jack. Jack was in the Navy, and he wasn't married. And in her movie version, the part about how Dorothy and the other passengers in lifeboat number 7 colluded to not rescue Titanic passengers who were freezing to death was left out of the script completely. That might have been bad for the real Dorothy's image. Dorothy and Jules made the first exploitation film. It was released on May 16th, 1912, just 1 month after the sinking, and it performed very well in box offices in the United States, France, and the United Kingdom. Dorothy was on top of the world and everything was going her way against all odds. She made it off of the Titanic alive and could tell her story. Not only was she telling it, she was getting paid a heck of a lot to do so. She had a successful movie running, she was the highest paid movie actress in the world, and she had the man she wanted getting ready to leave his wife any moment now so that he could marry her. Life was great. What was next? Retirement. After a film career that didn't even last 2 years, Dorothy retired at the top of her game. Some who have researched her extensively came to the conclusion that facing the fake Dorothy on the movie screen while knowing the truth about herself was just too much for her to handle, and that's why she walked away from the movie industry. But she still wanted fame. Her next move was to pursue a singing career. Jules was going to use his connections to make Dorothy an opera star. There was only one small problem with this. She couldn't really sing that well. But she did make it to the Metropolitan Opera House for one show run. There were no surprises there. Even Dorothy herself never said she had a pretty voice. She described her own voice as uncommon, which leads me to believe that Dorothy got a lot of requests to sing solo. Solo that no one can hear, please ma'am. With her singing career over as soon as it started, Dorothy was ready to move on to the next phase of her life. She wanted a husband. No, not her own husband. She wanted Clara Brulatour's husband, Jules. Quick side note, because we are a caring audience, I know that you care as much about Dorothy's clothing items that she lost on the Titanic just as much as she did. So I want to let you know that eventually she was compensated for what she lost. She and her mother received a $4,000 check from White Star Line, the owner of Titanic, in January of 1913. Meanwhile, Jules was doing everything that he could do to please his little Dorothy. I should mention that he was roughly twice her age. She was 22 when she boarded the Titanic and Jules was 42, with an age-appropriate wife. But he was doing his best to get rid of that old hag, and Dorothy was doing her best to be patient about it. Jules tried to make her wait as pleasant as he could. He gave Dorothy unlimited use of his Long Island house while she waited out his marriage. He also sent Dorothy and her mother on a few more European vacations, though how they mustered up their bravery to get on another ship is beyond me. And that little gray car that she just couldn't get her mind off of as the Titanic sank, Jules was letting her drive it all the time. It was already practically hers. So she spent a lot of days driving the Detroit to his Long Island home, where she could practice being his wife until it became her reality. Jules was actually doing double duty trying to satisfy both his mistress and his wife once he broke the news to Mrs. Brulatour. You can imagine that Clara was not too happy to hear from her husband of 18 years that he was ready to throw her out of the door and replace her with a younger woman. Not after she had loved and cared for him and had 4 children for him, only 3 were living. He understood that this news would not be easy for his wife to take, so he tried to make her happy too. Well, as happy as one could be given the circumstances. So he offered her a huge cash settlement to take and go live happily ever after. Without him. $20,000 right away, and she would also be the beneficiary of his $65,000 life insurance policy. That $20,000 alone is equivalent to about $630,000 today. Would that be enough money for you to forget about your hurt and embarrassment from a cheating spouse? Let me know. I think that it would be a good start for me. But this offer came with a condition. Clara would have to give him a private separation because he didn't want the embarrassment of a public divorce and the scandal that it would cause. The nerve! Everything was about him and what he wanted. Clara didn't like it, but she wasn't a fool. Jules offered her enough money to keep herself and their kids comfortable for life, so she took him up on the offer. Even though she was angry and didn't care about his reputation being ruined in the press, she didn't want to be embarrassed either. And the thought of the world knowing that her husband had been cheating on her for over a year with this young, silly actress would have been too much shame for her to bear. So she went along with his plan. Everyone was getting what they wanted. Kind of. Jules and Dorothy would get exactly what they wanted. Clara would get the consolation prize of a comfortable living. Everything was going as planned until Dorothy messed it up. And I know that you're probably saying, why would she mess things up? This is what she wanted. Well, she didn't do it on purpose. Here's what happened. One night, a lovely couple, the Smiths, were out for a walk. Dorothy was on one of her many trips from her Manhattan apartment to her lover's Long Island house. Of course, she was driving her favorite car. Maybe she was daydreaming about her wedding, but something distracted her and she jumped a curb. Before she knew it, her favorite car was off of the street and on the sidewalk. She ran into that lovely couple. The woman was Julia Smith, and she sustained serious injuries that left her hospitalized for several weeks. Mr. Henry Smith died. Behind the wheel of her favorite car, Dorothy Gibson killed a man. So how did this cause a hiccup in the arrangements that Jules had made for both of his women? Well, of course, this car accident went very public, but not immediately. At first, Jules was able to keep everything pretty quiet, and it took me a long time to figure out just how. When I was looking for the news articles about this car accident, I couldn't find any at all. Then I accidentally stumbled upon the fact that Dorothy Gibson had been using the name Dora Gibson with everything connected to this fatal accident. She had even been on the stand in court as Dora Gibson. Okay, Dora. Julia Smith sued Dorothy for her husband's death and the injuries that she herself sustained. The amount that she was seeking varies depending on the source. It was somewhere between $4,500 and $25,000. When Dora testified, she told the court that she and Jules were good friends. She was asked how long she had the gray Detroit car. She said a little over a year. Then she was asked if she was friends with Mrs. Brulatour. She said that she was not. She didn't know her. Good friends with him, but you don't know his wife of 18 years? That's suspicious. It was in this line of questioning that it was revealed that the car she was driving, the gray Detroit, wasn't even registered to Dorothy. Oops, I mean Dora. Well, whose car was this? The court and newspapers wanted to know. Oh, this car belongs to Jules Brulatour. I was just driving it. Really? Why? Are you driving the car as a business perk? No. Are you driving the car because you and Jules are such great friends? Sure. When Jules took the stand, he testified that Dora was, in fact, his fiancée. That was why she was driving his car. This only makes me wonder about something that I don't know about. When was it required for adults to have identification cards on their persons all the time? Like, there is a very small chance that today you or I could get into a car accident, give a police officer the wrong name, and then show up to court under that same false name. Well, in 1913, Dorothy Gibson did it. And after Jules testified that he was going to marry her, that was a big enough scandal that this married man was going to marry some young woman named Dora. By the way, he mentioned all of that in some weird, horrible effort to help her get out of paying that woman for her husband's death, which I think is disgusting. But guess how the truth about Dorothy's identity came out? She told on herself. There's a Baltimore Sun article from May 1913 that has some details really wrong. Like it states that Mr. Brulatour's chauffeur was driving on the night of the wreck. But it has the quote from Dorothy that gave herself away. It starts with her own words. Quote, "You see, ever since the Titanic disaster," she continued glibly, "I have been so nervous that I could not bear to drive the car at a high rate of speed or allow it to be driven fast." Thus, she disclosed her identity. End quote. During all of those court dates, no one knew a thing about her having been on the Titanic. She just let that slip out of her mouth. It was from that detail that everyone was able to figure it out. Jules made that Titanic movie, and that girl in it was Dorothy Gibson. And all of the film industry people already knew about his relationship with her. He had no shame about carrying on with her publicly. And people basically just put two and two together. And there it was. The biggest movie star in the world killed a man with her car. It was more than just a sensational headline. It was a huge lawsuit, and she did have to pay Mrs. Smith. Julia Smith was awarded the $4,500. Well, now, Clara Brulatour had been dragged into this and embarrassed. And with that, Jules no longer had the option to get that quiet, private divorce that he wanted. Remember, she only agreed to keep quiet because her own name wasn't going to be tarnished. But they were beyond that point because of his young, stupid, badly driving, murderous mistress. Now, Jules would have to suffer the shame of a very public divorce and still have to pay Clara a lot of money. I hope that she was worth it, Jules. Clara went on to sue Jules for divorce, and while he didn't get the privacy that he wanted about this matter, Jules finally got to marry the woman of his dreams, Dorothy Gibson, in 1917. She turned out to be a nightmare. They were both still the same people, and now, instead of cheating on their former spouses, they were cheating on each other. The marriage that they had both wanted so badly was over before it started. Dorothy and Jules learned that they both just liked the thrill of the adulterous nature of their affair. Without the excitement of potentially getting caught by their respective spouses, there was really nothing there. Very shortly after they exchanged vows, both Dorothy and Jules found other lovers. According to Jules, Dorothy had 2 lovers. Dirty harlot, he was only cheating on her with one person. We know where this is going, so I won't waste your time. After about 2 years of their charade of a marriage, Dorothy filed for divorce and asked for $48,000 in alimony, $1.1 million in our money today, plus $30,000 for attorney's fees. Well, that was a drop in the bucket for Jules. He was literally a millionaire. He had way more money than that. But he didn't think that she was worth it. Dorothy remembered how Jules offered his first wife, Clara, over $80,000. Well, he didn't think that Dorothy was worth it. Why wasn't she worth a little bit less than that? Instead of agreeing to her demands or offering any money, Jules countersued her for divorce. He was telling the court, "Don't give her a divorce, give me a divorce." He actually wanted his marriage to be annulled on the ground that it was never legal in the first place. And he had a point. And for that reason, even Clara wanted a say in his divorce from Dorothy. This paragraph from a 1919 edition of the Buffalo Times sums it up pretty well. Quote, "His plea for relief coincides with that of his first wife, from whom he obtained a decree of divorce by default in Kentucky in 1917. The first wife asks the marriage of the second wife to Brulator to be annulled as a fraud upon her rights. She says she never was served with the divorce papers and had no knowledge of the divorce until he had married his second wife. End quote. And he did all of that just so he could be with this woman who he now wanted to get out of his life and out of his house. His houses, actually. This divorce got so dirty. The woman who Jules had left his wife and children for, he was now calling a vampire and saying that she had put him under a spell and forced him to act against his will. That's the only reason that he cheated on his wife and left her. It was all Dorothy's fault. Well, here's how the judge resolved their matter. They got their divorce. Both parties were found to be equally responsible, and Jules was ordered to pay Dorothy $10,000 per year. But the judge was disgusted with both of them and said that neither party deserved any sympathy. He said that he only awarded Dorothy anything at all because he had to follow the law. The following year, Leonard Gibson, Dorothy's stepdad, filed a suit against Jules as well for $50,000. I didn't look into the details of that one because by the time that I saw that, I already had enough material for this video to be over an hour long. During her marriage to Jules, Dorothy continued to conduct herself as the fame-hungry monster that he had helped to create. And Jules, once again, found himself tired of his wife and in search of a younger woman. And he found one. A new actress was on the rise. Her name was Hope Hampton, and she was 8 years younger than the old hag, Dorothy Gibson. Oh, Dorothy, don't you know that when you are promoted from mistress to wife, you create a vacancy for a new mistress? That's just what Hope Hampton was. And Jules was in between Hope's legs before the ink was dry on the marriage certificate that he shared with Dorothy. I guess that Clara got the last laugh. Jules married Hope Hampton in 1923, and Dorothy was so embarrassed about it that she wanted to go and hide, and she literally did. Now, Dorothy got a taste of what it felt like for Clara Brulator being replaced by her husband's younger mistress. But Dorothy only got a very small taste of it. She couldn't handle the heat, and she needed to get out of the kitchen, or the country. She was too embarrassed to stay in America after her husband had so publicly moved on. In her own words, quote, "I had a great deal of unhappiness and much less money. Mr. Brulator had married again, and we still had many of the same friends. I was not very happy as my husband and his new wife were always around. Therefore, I went to Paris to live with my mother." End quote. So Dorothy left New York and went to Paris with her mother in tow. The money that Jules was paying her was enough for her to live comfortably in Europe. And there, she partied her nights away, trying the best to forget the shame that was left upon her name back home. She was living it up, drinking cocktails every day, hanging out with famous writers like James Joyce and H.G. Wells and her movie industry friends. And in Paris, she got the opportunity to be the woman on the side without any repercussions from the press. What can I say? She liked being with married men. She and her mom could let loose there. This was the life that they had always wanted. Pauline loved being in Paris so much that she didn't even go back to visit America for her husband's funeral. Eventually, Dorothy came to live a peaceful and quiet existence in France for some years, until trouble struck in 1939. The trouble was big. It was World War II. Pauline was half German, and she developed a strong loyalty to Germany while she and her daughter were living in Europe. She also developed an equal hate for America. She felt like the Germans had gotten a raw deal. Bad press during World War I. They were just misunderstood. She didn't know exactly why people were so hard on them. But her loyalty to Germany was more than strong. Pauline was a Nazi sympathizer, and her influence on Dorothy was still ever so strong, and Dorothy became a bit of a Nazi sympathizer too. And these two gals, who always wanted to be on the winning team, thought and hoped that Hitler would win this war, so they sided with him. We all know how that worked out. In 1941, Dorothy's ego took another hit when the film Citizen Kane was released. Now I have to admit, I've never seen this movie. I'm not much of a movie person at all. But what I read about this movie is that there's a character who has a talentless wife named Susan. Susan was apparently based on Dorothy Gibson. The main character, Charles Kane, is a media mogul like Jules Brulator. His wife, Susan, takes up opera singing, but she's no good at it, just like Dorothy had done. A gossip columnist named Luella Parsons wrote about the movie that, quote, "It was Brulator and his sad girls," end quote. Humiliating stuff for sure, but Dorothy had bigger fish to fry. She was in the middle of a war. And this is where things get really strange. For some reason, Dorothy's mother also developed a really strong liking for Mussolini, so she went to live in Italy to be as close to him as possible. Dorothy drove to get Pauline to bring her back to France and ended up getting stuck in Florence with her mother. There, she was interviewed by the Italian police and thrown in jail. She was charged with being an anti-fascist agitator. She didn't like jail at all. It wasn't nearly as luxurious as any place she'd called home in the past 20 years. So she left. She escaped. She tried to get to the Swiss border. Then she was captured and thrown into a Nazi concentration camp. While imprisoned, she met a double agent who was called Dr. Ugo. He came up with a plan to get himself, Dorothy, and another prisoner who was a journalist out of there. He had some help on the outside from Italian Catholic priests. The scheme that he cooked up was that they were all spies. Dorothy would just have to follow his lead and play along. Her last acting gig. It sounds like something from a corny movie, but believe it or not, his plan worked, and the three made it to Switzerland. But they weren't in the clear just yet. In Zurich, Dorothy was interrogated by authorities because they needed to know just what she knew and what kind of a threat she was. Thankfully for her, she was released because she was determined to be too stupid to be a real spy. One look at her spy work affidavit that she submitted to the American Consulate General, and James Bell said that Dorothy, quote, "hardly seems bright enough to be useful in such capacity," end quote. Sure, she may have been a bit moronic, but that saved her in the end. Authorities sent Dorothy's stupid ass with a one-way ticket back to Paris. There, she made her home in an apartment at the Hotel Ritz. She had a Spanish lover, Emilio Antonio Ramos, who was a press attaché for the Spanish embassy. She didn't get to enjoy a very long relationship with him, though, because she died. And that's all that I can say. On February 17th, 1946, Dorothy Gibson Brulator died in her apartment, and her death certificate did not list the official cause. By the time of her death, Dorothy was seen as such a joke that Hope Hampton, her husband's younger replacement model, was sometimes mentioned in her obituaries as the present Mrs. Brulator. Ouch. I think that she deserved a moment to shine solo in her own death. Dorothy had some money and possessions to leave behind, and they were split between her lover and her mother, Pauline, who outlived Dorothy by 15 years. She died in her Paris hotel room in 1961. This is a story about a woman who pretended to be the illegitimate daughter of one of the richest men on the planet. And because people bought into her lies, she was able to dupe a number of men into giving her millions of dollars. But before it was all over, Her illegal shenanigans would bring her in contact with the richest man in the world and a United States president. I'll explain. She's the inspiration for the Maud Beaton character on The Gilded Age. The men who gave her money in real life called her Cassie L. Chadwick. Once they realized she stole their money, they probably called her a whole lot of other things that I can't say here. She was a flaming hot mess. Let's get into it. For those who are watching The Gilded Age, you have seen the very gay Oscar Van Ryn try his best to fall for a woman so that he can carry on the family name. And once he realized that he was not going to be able to take advantage of Gladys Russell for her fortune, he turned his gaze to Maud Beaton, the self-proclaimed illegitimate daughter of one of the richest men in the world, Jay Gould. And it looked like he had a real thing going. He genuinely liked her, even though his preference in the bedroom was man meat. And just when he made up his mind that he wanted to build a future with Maud and propose to her, we learned that she took him for almost every penny his family had. Well, Maud Beaton was based on a real-life woman who did the very same thing to a string of men from the 1880s until the early 1900s. Many of those men knew her as Cassie L. Chadwick, the illegitimate daughter of Andrew Carnegie, who, in his prime, was the richest man in the world. What could go wrong? Before this lying harlot started calling herself Cassie Chadwick, she was born Elizabeth Bigley in Eastwood, Ontario, Canada, on October 10th, 1857. As a young girl, she was said to have had a mania for fine clothing. She started her life of crime in early adulthood. She was arrested for forgery in Woodstock, Ontario, when she was only 22. And she never did any time for that crime. She made a plea of not guilty by insanity, and it worked. Then, 3 years later, in 1882, the crazy lady got married in Cleveland, Ohio, and she married well. Probably because she lied to her husband about who she was. When she met him, she was posing as an heiress, and it worked. She married a doctor, Dr. Wallace S. Springsteen. And look, I found this ad of his. He had a cure for lady problems. Anyway, her marriage didn't last very long at all. 11 days to be exact. When her husband discovered her criminal background, he threw her little booty out of his house. After her days of being taken care of by the doctor were over, she ran a quickie swindle in Erie, Pennsylvania, under the name Madame La Rose. There, she told her friends that she had a lot of money, but she just couldn't get her hands on it at the time. She asked them to loan her money for an operation for a hemorrhage. Her condition was fake, but they believed her because somehow she managed to extract blood from her gums, and that made her look like whatever the hell she said she was going through. So her friends lent her the money and never saw her again. A couple of years later, under the name Lily Bagley, she moved into a boarding house owned by a Mrs. Hoover. By this time, Cassie was pregnant with someone's child. She wrote back home to Canada telling her mother and sister that she had married a wealthy old man named C.L. Hoover, and he was the father. He was also conveniently dead. At some point, her son, whom she named Emil Hoover, giving him his fake daddy's last name, went to live with her mother and sister, leaving her free to continue faking her existence as an heiress, getting a little more money with each new ruse. Cassie assumed another name, then began telling the world that she was a fortune teller, first as Lydia Scott, then as Madame Lydia de Vere. In that career, if you will, she committed forgery against one of her clients, earning herself a new home, the state penitentiary in Ohio, for a 9.5-year sentence. She was paroled by the governor after serving only 4 years. The governor at that time was William McKinley. Just 5 years after paroling her, he would become the 25th President of the United States. And just 4 years after that, he'd be dead, assassinated while serving as president. And what does a girl do after she gets out of prison? Well, this one married another doctor. She lived for a while under another alias while she was working at a massage parlor. One day, in walks Leroy Chadwick. He got a massage from her, then he wanted her hand in marriage. I don't know if she gave him a happy ending or what, but very shortly after that massage, she was married to Dr. Leroy Chadwick in 1897. His family was well known and well respected, and just the way that Mrs. Astor and New York City had their Astor's 400, the list of the top 400 people in high society who really mattered, other cities all around the country had their own respective 400 lists, and Dr. Chadwick was a member of Cleveland's 400. And he had no clue at all about Cassie's family, friends, or background, which meant that he didn't know about her criminal past. His relatives and friends were not fond of Cassie. To them, she was just some stranger who had appeared out of thin air. They were all in a very tight social circle, and not a lot of outsiders made it in. They thought it was extra strange that not even one of their own knew of Cassie, and they were protective of Dr. Chadwick because he had such a reserved and easygoing personality that they were concerned that someone might try to take advantage of him. And frankly, that was the vibe that they got from Cassie. Well, literally the year that she married Dr. Chadwick, she started going on a fraudulent borrowing spree. She borrowed, and I use that term very loosely, hundreds of thousands of dollars from multiple banks in Cleveland. And just how did this ex-con get her grubby little hands on those bank loans? I mean, her husband's medical practice was doing well, very well in fact, but using his Chadwick name wouldn't have qualified her for those kinds of big money loans. So she just used another name, Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie to be exact. And he just so happened to be the wealthiest man in the world at the time that Cassie was throwing his name around from bank to bank. But still, she was a Chadwick. So how did she get to the path of using the Carnegie name? She told everybody that she was the illegitimate daughter of Andrew Carnegie, and people believed her. The right people believed her. People with money. Bankers. This lying-ass bandit used $5 million in securities, certificates, and promissory notes forged with Andrew Carnegie's name as security. She even had proof of a trust that he had established for her worth just over $10 million. And who would question that? Surely he had the money, so in their eyes, she was good for it. They just gave her the money that she wanted. Think about it. This was the 1890s and very early 1900s when Cassie was running these schemes. Identification systems were either not sophisticated or non-existent. She wouldn't have had a driver's license in her purse to pull out at the bank. And being an illegitimate child wasn't a detail that someone would have been proud to share about themselves in the 1890s. So if she was saying it, it must have been true. And who was going to call out Andrew Carnegie for having a little fun on the side? Nobody was. Clearly, at the very least, he was financially providing for his daughter. So Cassie just showed up, wearing the right clothes, displaying the right mannerisms, pretending to be a rich lady of society whose father wanted to take care of her and was very generous with his money to her, because it was the least that he owed her, since she wasn't allowed to carry his last name or be reared in the same household with his legitimate children. That was how it was laid out. Everyone just took her word at face value and whispered in polite tones about Andrew Carnegie's rich bastard daughter while she blended in with the wealthy of Ohio, Massachusetts, and New York. Well, her time of playing the role of elite socialite was up when, in 1904, a man named H.B. Newton exposed her and ultimately caused her to have to pay for her crimes. When he came forward with his claim against Cassie that she had stolen $190,800 from him, others who had been looking for her were able to file lawsuits against her as well for money that she had taken from them in just the same way, with her quote-unquote daddy's signature as security for the repayment. Cassie's November trial included a lineup of her victims. Here are the names and amounts of the money that some of them wanted to recover. Euclid Avenue Savings and Trust, $38,231.32. American Exchange National Bank, $28,808.25. And Savings Deposit Bank Elyria for $10,000. Including H.B. Newton's claim, she owed over $257,000 that she had stolen. But that was only from the bank presidents who weren't so embarrassed that they went public with how they had been taken. One of those embarrassed men was Charles Beckwith. He was the president of the Citizens National Bank in Oberlin, Ohio, a very tiny bank. And by the time that Cassie encountered him, her audacity and confidence were through the roof, so the $10,000 and $40,000 loans that she had obtained before were chump change. She requested from Mr. Beckwith $340,000 that included $100,000 for a personal loan. By all accounts, he was smitten with her and gave her everything that she asked for. And having those forged promissory notes from Andrew Carnegie didn't exactly hurt her chances of getting approved for a bank loan. But Charles seemed to have a very personal interest in Cassie. Altogether, Cassie had stolen roughly $2 million, jumping from various cities in Ohio to Massachusetts to New York, claiming that she was Andrew Carnegie's secret love child. Those are crazy amounts of money for the 1900s. Adjusted for inflation, that $2 million around the year 1900 would have been like Cassie stealing over $70 million today in 2023. And again, that only includes the amounts that people eventually came forth to claim. Long story short, Cassie was arrested on December 2nd, 1904. And from the looks of it, the cops got to her just in the nick of time. They found her at a room in the Hotel Breslin in Manhattan, apparently ready to make a run out of the state, possibly out of the country. Police discovered $100,000 in cash strapped around her waist. Then there was the trial. All of the details were laid out about so many of her crimes and so much money that she had stolen. But would any of those plaintiffs ever see their money returned? No, because Cassie was spending that money as quickly as she was stealing it. Her purchases were described as many and excessively extravagant, and that's saying a lot considering that she was doing this in the Gilded Age, a time when millionaires were literally painting rooms of their mansions in 24-karat gold. A great deal about Cassie's methods of carrying out her crimes came out in the trial. For instance, after she had gotten off on her first forgery charge, and before she married the doctor in 1882, earlier that same year, she got arrested for borrowing money and not repaying it. She was using yet another name, Alice M. Bastedo, and her collateral for that loan was furniture that belonged to her sister. And after that first doctor kicked her out after just 11 days of marriage, she tried to get $6,000 out of him as some type of lump sum alimony payment. He didn't have to pay her, but for perspective, that's equivalent to about $200,000 today. That's what she wanted in repayment for her 11 days of being a wife to him. In 1883, she faked her own death, writing to some friends that one of her many aliases had just been buried. And in 1887, she committed forgery to obtain an $18,000 loan. That was the crime that earned her the 9.5-year sentence, the one for which McKinley paroled her. Now, this is an interesting addition to that charge. A man named Joe Lamb helped her to commit that crime, and he was charged and tried right along with her. But he was acquitted on the ground that Cassie's hypnotic charm rendered him completely irresponsible. Good Lord, what did this lady have? What kind of charm gave her this kind of hold over people I want some. I'm trying to do some research to see if she left behind a course or a how-to guide or even a journal for the rest of us ladies. If she did, I'll come back with a part 2 on Miss Cassie, 'cause damn. You see her photos? And none of the men who stole from her even claimed that they found her to be particularly good-looking, but there was this constant theme of men saying that she was hypnotic or they felt like they were under her spell. At any rate, by the time that H.V. Newton's charges brought her to justice, she was still married to the second doctor, Dr. Chadwick. But he had left Cassie in his mansion and went off to live in Europe with his daughter from his first marriage. But when the charges were filed against Cassie, they were filed against Dr. Chadwick too. The thought was that he was her husband, so he had to have known. He had to have been in on it too. She was wrecking men's lives from sea to shining sea. And poor Charles Beckwith, the president of Citizens National Bank of Oberlin, who had loaned her the $340,000 because of her forged Carnegie promissory notes, he had to close his little bank for good. She bankrupted his bank. One source said of Cassie's stealing and spending that, quote, she obtained vast sums of money from unknown sources and squandered vast sums in unparalleled extravagance, end quote. Now, I don't have a detailed list of how and where she spent all of this money, but I did learn that one of her extravagant undertakings with the stolen money was refurnishing her husband's mansion. She spent $200,000 on new decor. That's like you and I spending $7 million today with someone else's money. The nerve. Well, I hope that it was worth it for her, because on March 10th, 1905, Cassie Chadwick was convicted on 7 counts of conspiracy against the government and conspiracy to wreck the Citizens National Bank of Oberlin. Her husband, Dr. Chadwick, had to sail back to the United States from Europe and have his day in court too. But he was exonerated, and rightfully so. He literally had no clue of what his wife had been doing in his mansion while he was in Europe. And as was usual with Cassie, there was some drama in the courtroom after her guilty verdict was announced. Now, by this time in her life, Cassie was losing her hearing. She was partially deaf. So when the clerk stood to read the jury's verdict, guilty on all 7 counts, Cassie Chadwick just stood there in silence, flanked by her lawyer and her son, who was now grown. She hadn't heard a thing. Finally, her attorney, Francis J. Wing, told her, "We have lost Mrs. Chadwick." She turned beet red, then raised her hand to her head and sank down into her chair. When she was led away to her jail cell, she cried out, "Let me go! Oh my God! Let me go! I'm not guilty! I'm not guilty, I tell you! Let me go!" Then she fainted, but they still took her ass to jail. Then there was Cassie's sentencing hearing. And guess who attended? None other than Cassie's fake daddy, Andrew Carnegie himself. She was sentenced to 14 years in prison and fined a mere $70,000. That was nothing compared to all that she had taken from people. And I have to say that it's the money that she took from people, because that was the truth. Yes, the banks were holding it, and sometimes we can get a good laugh when we think about somebody sticking it to the system, sticking it to the banks. You know, the banks are stealing from us. Now they know how we feel. But the fact was that Cassie stole from every account holder at those banks. This was before the days of Americans' money being secured by the FDIC. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation wasn't established until 1933. Quick note, if you're not an American and you aren't familiar with the FDIC, because I know that we have a lot of people in Ireland and England specifically who watch this channel, the FDIC is a government corporation that insures our bank accounts for up to $250,000 per account. Well, for the sake of Oberlin College, It's a good thing that Andrew Carnegie attended Cassie's sentencing, because when all of the facts came out about Charles Beckwith, the tiny bank president, the court learned that some of the money that he gave to Cassie belonged to Oberlin College. That meant that the money for the school was just gone. $50,000. But Carnegie stepped in to save the day for the college. He gave them triple for their trouble, replacing their lost $50,000 with a $150,000 donation for the construction of a new library. That building still stands today on Oberlin's campus, but now as home to the geology department and other administrative offices. Andrew Carnegie felt horrible for Cassie's victims, and he did help some other ones out as well. She was finally jailed on January 12, 1906, and once the trial was over, it was over for everybody else. Everybody except for the tiny banker, Charles Beckwith, who visited Cassie in prison to tell her, quote, "I am not convinced that you are a fraud, and I look for the time when everything will be straightened out." End quote. He could just not bring himself to believe it, even though he was financially ruined and his bank was gone. Even though he actually had to serve time in jail himself for having been so reckless with the money that belonged to his account holders. And a statement from one person could have saved him from going to jail, and that person was Cassie. Here's what he said about her on his deathbed. Quote, "I could have died happy if she had said one word to clear my name. When I first found that she could not meet her obligations, and I begged her on my knees to save the bank, she laughed in my face. The woman has wrecked my life and the life of thousands whose savings were entrusted to my care." End quote. But he was put out of his misery just a few weeks after visiting Cassie when he died in shame. He was almost as pitiful as a man could be by the end. He was blind, paralyzed, and delirious as he used his last breath to talk about Cassie. His doctor said that the only sense he had left was his sense of hearing, which I think is a little ironic considering that that was the only sense that Cassie didn't have. By the end, she was completely deaf. When the news of his passing reached her, members of the press showed up to her cell, wanting a statement. She was cold and had nothing to say to any of them. She said that she didn't care. But when left alone, in the confidence of a cellmate, Cassie told her that she thought that Beckwith would overcome his illness and get well. She said that the news of his death left her pained beyond expression. But one person did fare well as a result of Cassie's trial. This was a time when drugstore soda fountains were popular in the United States due to the belief that carbonated water was good for health. So there was a belief that sodas helped to cure ailments. Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper were created by doctors, and Pepsi was created by a pharmacist. Well, a Cleveland pharmacist came up with his own drink called Cassie Chadwick Nerve Tonic. Nerve, the one thing that she had plenty of. And if anybody in Cleveland needed some nerve, a sip of his refreshing tonic would hit the spot. It was a bit of a joke, but it did sell very well for him. As for Cassie Chadwick, she didn't get a lot of visitors in prison. Dr. Chadwick didn't visit her at all and barely spoke of her. Months after she was incarcerated, he took his daughter with him to Florida, where he had a brother who owned a furniture store. Then Dr. Chadwick started selling furniture for his brother. And yet again, Cassie did not serve her full sentence. But this time, it wasn't because she got paroled. Remember that she was born on October 10th? Well, she died on her birthday, October 10th, 1907, at the age of 50, serving less than 2 years of her 14-year sentence. Her cause of death, according to the prison doctor, was a bad heart. Well, no one who had a seat at her trial would have argued with that diagnosis. There was a time when celebrity described a person who was celebrated for his or her works, whether those works included acting, singing, or dancing, or a combination of two of those things, or maybe even all three. In Hollywood's golden age, a person who could do all three, act, sing, and dance, was called a triple threat. The day of the triple threat is virtually over. Some would even argue that it's hard to find a celebrity who performs one talent well. That's subjective, but there's another kind of celebrity that we see plenty of today. Celebrities who have no discernible talent at all. People who are just famous for being famous. Maybe they are women who are pretty, or men who are handsome, or people with rich parents, or people married to someone who is famous, or related to someone who is famous. This social media age makes it easy to get one's name on the map. Well, before all of this, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter with their verified check marks that let you know that the person you are interacting with is a celebrity, there were newspapers. And before anyone named Kardashian or Jenner or Hilton or Harvey or LaToya Jackson or Kevin Federline rode the coattails of their family name to stardom, a girl named Kitty Fisher created her own fame and fortune using the newspapers of London's Fleet Street. And she did it by sharing the details of the sexual affairs that she had with wealthy men of the city. And what an amazing fortune she gained from it all. Let's get into it. There are so many people around today who are famous just for being famous. You know who they are, and you probably wouldn't have to think too hard to come up with 5 names who fit into this category. They're not actors, singers, or comedians. Sometimes they are called socialites, or maybe even Instagram models or influencers. They are people who use their money to make an impression on the public. That money might be accompanied by salacious rumors or even sex tapes, anything to get their name in the news or the blogs. The whole idea of this manufactured fame seems like a relatively new phenomenon, but it's not. As far back as the 18th century, the newspapers were just as fascinated with scandalous stories as social media is today. And the more scandalous the stories were, the better. And British newspapers liked to get straight to the heart of the scandals, so they loved to print stories about the most scandalous women, prostitutes. The London writers knew who the prostitutes were, and they frequently used them as sources for their stories. And the more vulgar a prostitute was, the better, for she would have the best stories, and those stories sold newspapers. These days, people make jokes about hoe culture and how hoes are coming up and hoes are staying on top. And even this is nothing new. In the 1700s, the whores whose stories were printed the most also had books published and prints were made of their portraits. Those prints could easily sell by the hundreds or the thousands. And according to several sources, Kitty Fisher was the prostitute who paved the way for the other prostitutes of her age to earn some major side cash that would supplement, and in some instances even surpass, the earnings that they made from selling their cooches. Kitty started prostituting when she was a teenager in the late 1750s. Straight away, she got the attention of a lot of men because she was deemed to be beautiful. It didn't take long for prominent artists on the London scene to take notice of her, and they wanted to paint her portrait, and Kitty let them. Her prints spread throughout the local gentry, or upper class, with the greatest ease. But Kitty was more than just a pretty face and a good time for men willing to pay for her services. She had a natural knack for publicity. So the stories of her affairs with men of means spread as far and wide as her legs. And not only did men want to be with her, women wanted to be her. Women who wanted to get the sexual attention of men would style themselves after Kitty, from the way that she wore her makeup and hair to the way that she dressed. She was a trendsetter. In the 1700s, it was a common practice for high-class hookers to do their own PR. Some were better than others, but it seems that Kitty was the best. She knew how to draw men in with her advertisements by letting them know that she would stimulate their bodies and their minds because she was skilled at conversation. That set her apart from other prostitutes and gave her favor in the eyes of wealthier clients. And it was via those wealthy clients that she rose up through the ranks. As her client list became more upper class, so did she, which was quite a feat at that time in London, a city that looked down on anyone who even tried to social climb. But it worked for Kitty. She used each wealthy client as a stepping stone to get to an even wealthier one, increasing her own wealth with each step. But I suppose that you can't win them all. When the famous Italian lover, Casanova, yes, that Casanova, met Kitty while on holiday in England, he didn't seem to be too impressed by her. This is what he wrote of their encounter. Quote, "The illustrious Kitty Fisher, who was just beginning to be fashionable. She was magnificently dressed, and it is no exaggeration to say that she had on diamonds worth 500,000 francs. Goudard told me that if I liked, I might have her then and there for 10 guineas. I did not care to do so, however, for though charming, she could only speak English, and I like to have all my senses, including that of my hearing, gratified." End quote. And just for the record, in addition to having her stories and advertisements printed in the papers, the other form of media that Kitty was taking advantage of was paintings. Kitty would sit with any artist who wanted to paint her, even rival artists. And in the 1700s, prints of paintings were reproduced in all sizes and sometimes different shapes. This allowed Kitty to have a lot of distributable media to keep her image on the minds of men. She was basically the first pin-up girl. Her image could have been plastered on a wall or hidden away in a snuff box or on the inside of a locket. She was flat out famous, or infamous depending on who you ask. There was a popular nursery rhyme about Kitty stealing the lovers of other prostitutes. And then there was Kitty's very public falling out with Maria Lady Coventry. Now, who the heck was Maria Lady Coventry? She was a countess of London's high society who would throw fabulous balls. Much the opposite of Kitty, who was a hooker and therefore had a different affiliation with balls. Namely, Maria's husband's balls. And who was Maria Lady Coventry's husband? George Coventry, the 6th Earl of Coventry. All that really matters about him for the sake of this story is that he was born into money and with a title. So here's how that story goes about Kitty's public spat with his wife. Picture it. London, 1750-something. In the park, Kitty is walking, looking fabulous in one of her custom-made dresses. Lady Coventry sees her, admires her beautiful dress, and asks, "Will you please tell me the name of your dressmaker who made this dress? It is beautiful." To which Kitty replies, "I wish that I could tell you, but I can't, because it was a gift. But I know who you can't ask. The person who gave it to me, Lord Coventry, you know, your husband." To which Maria replied, "Well, I never." To which Kitty replied, "Well, I have, with your husband, over and over and over and over." Now, I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but that really was the gist of it. At some point, the Countess called Kitty an impertinent woman. And Kitty replied something to this effect: "I will have to accept this insult because you are socially superior to me since marrying Lord Coventry, but I will marry a lord one day, just so that I can answer back to you." Well, Kitty may not have come out looking the best in this story, but she made sure that it hit the papers. At the very least, people would know that she was hanging out in the right circles. even if it meant that a countess was talking down to her. Kitty had a way of flipping embarrassing situations to work in her benefit in a positive and profitable way. She became so wealthy from her rich clients and her publicity about them that she was able to totally change her life and her socioeconomic status. She started out as a poor, pretty prostitute, but before her life was over, Kitty was able to spend £12,000 per year. That's equivalent to the purchasing power of over £3 million today in 2022. She was also said to be the first woman born into her low social class who eventually was able to employ liveried servants. And that just means servants in uniform, with each servant having a uniform that is specific for his or her position. Think of Downton Abbey as a reference. And that wealthy husband who Kitty wanted so that she could go back to the Countess and tell her off? She got him. Her rapid rise through the upper echelons of London society put her in the way of John Norris, Member of Parliament for Rye. He married her in 1766 at his family's house, Hempstead, in the village of Benenden, in Kent. And it seems like the two could possibly have been using each other. You see, Kitty's wealth was on the way up, and her husband's was on the way down. So, she devoted her life to building up his dilapidated fortunes, all the while getting to be looked at as a more respectable woman, and finally seen as a well-regarded and welcomed member in society. In return, John got the use of Kitty's money and a wife who was young and beautiful. In her time as John Norris's wife, Kitty also became known for her philanthropic efforts and generosity to the needy. They say that it's not about how you start, but how you finish. And it seems like the girl whose job it was to give happy endings ended up living a happy ending for herself, even if that ending seemed to come too soon. Yes, unfortunately, Kitty didn't get to enjoy being a high society woman for too long. Only 4 months after her wedding, she died in March of 1767 at the age of 26. Her exact cause of death is not known, but the 3 suggestions are that she either died of smallpox, consumption, or from the effects of lead-based cosmetics. If the last suggestion is the correct one, that Kitty died from cosmetics poisoning, that would be quite a coincidence, because her adversary from the park, who wanted to know about her dressmaker, the Countess, died the same way. Kitty died at the age of 26, and the Countess died at the age of 27. The lead-based makeup that the ladies were using was called Venetian ceruse, and it was used to make the skin as white as possible, literally the way that we think of clown makeup today. That was fashionable in the 1700s. Possibly the most famous person who most of us know of who used this makeup was Queen Elizabeth I. It seemed to make her beautiful until it started to literally eat away at her skin and cause her to lose hair. By the time that she was in her last days, she had to wear the lead-based poisoning an inch thick just to cover the holes in her face. The same was likely true for Kitty and the Countess in our story. But even though Kitty's beauty regimen is likely what caused her demise, she still went out in true Kitty Fisher fashion, for her last dying wish was to be buried in her best ball gown. And her wish was granted. She was buried on her husband's estate in Benenden Churchyard, which is now the premises of Benenden School, an independent boarding school for girls in Kent, England. This little homewrecker, Ellen Love, was not a depiction of a real woman, but rather a good representation of the many women who Harry Selfridge kept as mistresses while he was married with children. You probably know about the turn-of-the-century retail magnate Harry Gordon Selfridge. When I covered his amazing rags to riches to rags story here on this channel, I told you about his very public romantic affair with Gaby Deslys. Here's a refresher for you. Harry has this plate glass window in his office that's called the signature window. If you're noteworthy, Harry invites you to his office so that you can sign it with his diamond-pointed stylus. The names of some of the world's most famous and interesting people are on this window. It has the autographs of Rudolph Valentino, Amelia Earhart, Prince George, Duke of Kent, Ethel Barrymore, Drew Barrymore's great-aunt, the Dolly sisters, Vivian Lee, Isadora Duncan, Will Rogers, Anna Pavlova, Prince George of Russia, Eleanor Glenn, and Gaby Deslys. You know that those last two names are a couple of his mistresses. But Harry slept with at least 3 of those people whose names I just rattled off. I bet that his wife wanted to smash that window to pieces. After all, part of its purpose, whether intentional or not, is to memorialize his sexual trysts. And a lot of the women who signed were merely famous women who didn't cause any trouble in Harry's marriage. Gaby Deslys signed the window, but she did cause some trouble in his marriage. Let me tell you about her. Gaby is a French showgirl. She's a dancer and just the kind of babe that Harry Selfridge likes. Beautiful, loose, and popular. He loves famous women. He loves being in the in crowd. Now, Gaby has a reputation for a lot of things. She's the toast of London during World War I, and it was this known thing that she had a fee that men paid to take her out on dates. And it's not going to take long for Harry to pay more than all of those desperate men combined. So, it's some work day in 1912. After a hard day at Selfridge's, Harry heads down to the Palace Theatre on Shaftesbury Avenue. The live show he's watching is Mademoiselle Chic. The star of the show is Gaby. Most of her reviews say that she doesn't have a lot of talent, but Harry thinks that she's great. In this particular show, she strips down to her underwear. Harry is blown away. Damn what those critics think. This girl has got it. As a matter of fact, he's so convinced by her nearly nude act that he takes it upon himself to buy this young lady some clothes. Yes, Harry invites Gaby to Selfridge's to give her a guided tour and allow her to pick out some items that she can wear. Because Harry is, just a good guy who wants to help. And he continues to help Gaby. For the next few years, he's lavishing her with expensive gifts. And I'm not talking about designer shoes and handbags and clothes. Well, not just those things. Harry is going all out. Rubies, sapphires, emeralds, pearls, diamonds, whatever she wants from Harry, she gets. Meanwhile, Rose is at home, turning a blind eye, but there's only so many times that she can turn her head till she can't help but see. Harry is obsessed with Gaby, and he's being very public and very sloppy about his open affection towards her. He's out with Gaby in public, spending nights at her shows, leaving Rose and their 4 children without a husband and father for days at a time. You know that Rose has to be embarrassed. But then, instead of coming to his senses and trying to make things right with his family, Harry does the total opposite when he not leases but purchases a stately home in Kensington for Gaby. He pays £50,000 for it. Let's be clear, Harry is not just buying her a house. He's putting Gaby in high style. Kensington is one of the most affluent neighborhoods in London. He is making a statement and damn near marking his territory with his purchase. £50,000 in 1912 is like $7.7 million today.
That's a lot more than the trinkets that men of means typically give their mistresses. Gaby spends her time in the public eye, making it clear that her affection is for sale. And Harry, who loves to win, is proud to be the highest bidder. Not only does Harry buy her this exquisite home, he furnishes it completely, and all of the furnishings come from Selfridge's. And his trucks have his company logo, so again, I can't state enough just how public and sloppy this whole situation was. His trucks were pulling into Gaby's driveway at a steady pace to keep loading up her house with all of the finest wares from his 150 departments at Selfridge's. The neighbors know. The whole city knows. Harry is embarrassing his family, but he's too blinded by his love for Gaby to see it or to care about it. While Harry is making these decisions all on his own, Gaby is no angel in the situation. It's Harry's decision to cheat, but she also knows that he's a married man with children. But as long as he's paying her way, she doesn't care. She's happy to be his lover. She's happy about the attention that they're getting, even if it makes her look like a woman who lacks character. And for Harry, the money is pouring in left, right, and center from Selfridge's. So he just wants to be the good guy and share with the woman he loves. His generosity knows no bounds. Neither does Rose's frustration and embarrassment. This husband of hers is spending the next few years of their married life sending Selfridge's delivery trucks to Gaby's house almost daily. Those trucks are loaded with the best that his store has to offer. Delicacies from all over the world, huge quantities of the finest wines and champagnes and flowers. He loves to send Gaby enormous bouquets of roses. Roses. His wife's name is Rose. How can he not stop and think about the mother of his children as he's carrying on like this? And guess what else? On the rare days that he's not having his finest merchandise delivered to Gaby, she's coming into the store. Well, because she needs to visit her sweet Harry and she needs to shop. She picks out the best and most expensive items she sees and buys them on credit. And she charges all of this stuff to Harry's account. Month after month, he smiles and foots the bill. Kind of makes you wonder how he's going to end up with no money at the end of this story, right? His actions are nothing short of disgraceful. But here's the biggest stunt he pulls for Gaby, and if this doesn't scream obsession, I don't know what does. Gaby complains to Harry, "Honey, my garden is a mass of tangled weeds, and that makes me so sad." Perhaps she only had time to be a hoe and not use one. But she doesn't need to lift one finger because Harry is a good guy who cares about women. You can say that he is a rake who doesn't know how to use one. But he has enough money to hire all of the rakes and hoes that it will require to get rid of those weeds for his sweet, precious Gaby. But he goes beyond that. After Gaby made that complaint to Harry, she wakes up the next morning, looks out of her window to see that not only are all of the weeds gone, but spring is in full blossom in her yard. Her lawn is covered in an array of spring flowers, daffodils, pansies, azaleas, and tulips, you name it. If the flower exists, it's there in her garden. Harry created a springtime miracle that happened in the dead of the night thanks to his floral department and the overtime that he paid them. So, one more point for Big Daddy Harry, I guess. But when it comes to Gaby and the rest of his mistresses, he is playing the short game, and he's playing to lose. His public affairs and the visible trail of Selfridge's branded delivery trucks outside of Gaby's home are proof to his rivals that Harry's personal indiscretions are making his place of business bad for the city. So now Harrods and Whiteleys are taking subtle shots at Dirty Harry, advertising their own stores as respectable, without saying, because who wants to spend their money with a dirty adulterer? Crikey. And poor Rose, who at this time is facing immense social pressure and scrutiny. Victorian and Edwardian ideals of marriage were rigid, placing the burden of maintaining a family's dignity on the woman, even if her husband was the one who strayed. You know how it goes. She must not be taking care of him if he needed to look somewhere else for affection. There's not much for her to do but suffer in quiet dignity. Even divorce is likely not an option because divorcing a man as powerful as Harry is going to cause yet another scandal. And that's something that Rose simply cannot handle. Harry's self-centeredness is shining through. When you think of the fact that part of Rose's appeal to him was her high society family name, and that with each affair he has, he's just dragging her family name and his own through the mud. Harry's inability to control his impulses is eroding their marriage. But right now, all that he can see is Gaby. Well, that's until he sees Gabrielle Ray. Yep, he's already got his eyes on his next tart. But before I get to her, just in case you think that Gaby deserves some karmic retribution for her part in Harry's extramarital affair, here's what happened to her. Not so fast, former self. I'll tell you about that in this video. Now, that clip that you just saw only covers Gaby's relationship with Harry because that video was about him. But today, I want to tell you more about her. Mainly another relationship that she was in prior to her relationship with Harry. A relationship that should have made Harry think twice before getting involved with her. Harry Selfridge was only one in a long list of men she used to get what she wanted. Men who had to pay her to wine and dine her, just to be in her company. She set her price, and those men would pay it. This is the story of a French showgirl who went from stripping down to her underwear on stage to owning $1 million worth of jewels. A woman so beautiful that a king lost his throne over her. So expensive that even a multimillionaire like Harry Gordon Selfridge couldn't afford her. Some might say that Gaby thought too highly of herself, that she was vain. And that could be a fair assessment, as it seems like her vanity is what ultimately led to her death. But before we get there, let me tell you about her scandalous life. Let's rewind to 1909. Gaby Deslys is already famous in Paris. She's worked her way up from being a Gaiety girl, a mere chorus girl. You can see her name here in small print near the bottom of this 1906 ad for the new Aladdin in the Daily Paragraph, a London paper. But Gaby's name was not meant to be in small print, and she was definitely not meant to be at the bottom of anything in her eyes. Just 3 years after this pitiful little advertisement, it's not just her name in the papers, but her photos, sometimes taking up full pages. She's performing at the Moulin Rouge, stripping down on stage wearing outrageous feathered headdresses that weigh up to 30 pounds and charging men 50 pounds just to have dinner with her. That's over $8,000 in today's money for dinner. And that's all you get, gentlemen. Just to give you an idea of how huge Gaby's appeal is at this time, let me show you this little story from the Muncie Evening Press. Evanston Bar's Girls Gaby Club. Mothers put ban on pledges to emulate smile and garb of actress. It was just a group of teenage girls who vowed to wear their hair like Gaby with bangs, dress like her, pose like her. When the leader of this fan club told her mother that the rest of the girls in the club were coming over for their first meeting at her house, the mother told her absolutely not and put a stop to the foolish celebrity worship at once. How about instead of your little party, we burn all of your Gaby Deslys stuff, okay? And that's just what they did, according to this story. If only King Manuel II's mommy could stop his Gaby obsession
the way that these mothers did with their daughters, he might not lose his throne. So, it seems like there's a plan for this young king to court an English princess. And in September of 1909, the talk around Europe is that he's on his way to see her. But it turns out that there is no romance brewing with an English princess. However, closer to home, actually in Portugal, a few months later, there's an engagement announcement. The bride-to-be is the daughter of the former minister to Portugal. Her name is Miss Yvonne Townsend, and the country of Portugal is rejoicing because soon they'll have a new queen. But one night, King Manuel II of Portugal walks into the theater and sees Gaby Deslys instead. He doesn't plan this encounter. Like the most exciting stuff in life, it just happens. The king is young, he's handsome, and he's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The 19-year-old king sees Gaby perform and he's immediately obsessed. They meet after the show, and just like that, they're having an affair that's about to change the course of European history. Now, you need to understand something about King Manuel. This isn't just some rich playboy. He's the ruler of an entire country, a country that is, at this time in our story, nearly bankrupt. His people are struggling. And what does struggling look like in 1909 Portugal? It looks like 3 out of 4 people who can't read or write. It looks like a country that has declared bankruptcy twice in the past 17 years. It looks like peasants leaving their farms and flooding into Lisbon and Porto, hoping to find factory work, only to end up crammed into slums on the outskirts of the city with no running water and no hope. Portugal's economy is running at just 40% of what the average Western European country is producing. While Britain and France are building railroads and factories, Portugal is falling further and further behind. The working class is putting in 12 to 14-hour days for wages that literally cannot keep up with the price of bread. And Manuel's own father, King Carlos, he had been so hated for the way that he handled the country's finances that he and Manuel's older brother were assassinated in the streets of Lisbon just the year before, shot dead in broad daylight. That's how Manuel became king in the first place, because his father and brother were murdered by people who were sick and tired of watching the royal family live in luxury while they starved. So here's young Manuel, 19 years old, ruling over a country where people are rioting in the streets, where Republican revolutionaries are gaining support every single day, where his own military is starting to turn against the crown, against him. And what is this boy king doing? He's showering a French showgirl with jewelry. He is so utterly in awe of Gaby Deslys that his dead father and brother escape his mind. He doesn't care about the consequences of so openly lavishing her in presents. He gives Gaby a pearl necklace worth $70,000. That's over $2 million in today's money. Then he gives her more jewelry, diamonds, emeralds. He's emptying the royal treasury while his people can barely afford bread. He lodges her in a suite inside the royal palace at Lisbon. The royal palace. This woman is living under the same roof where kings have ruled for centuries. He's not hiding her away like some shameful secret, the way that a dignified king would hide a plaything with no royal blood, who can never rule by his side. No, he parades her around in public, showing off his French prize, while his country burns. And those jewels I mentioned, he gives her even more, $500,000 worth. He drapes her in diamonds and pearls like she's the queen and not just some actress he picked up in Paris during a fling the winter before. The newspapers say the Johnnies in London went wild over her. Well, now, the boy king of Portugal has gone wild over her too, wild enough to bring her back to Lisbon with him. Wild enough to risk everything. Well, he's a public figure to say the least, and so is she. So, The Portuguese newspapers start reporting on this affair. The public, the poor people in his kingdom, are quite understandably furious. Their king is giving away their country's wealth, what little of it exists, to a French titty dancer while they're living in abject poverty. Damn those peasants. I like what Gaby's got, and she's got a lot. That's how they felt. He felt. The scandal becomes so massive that it practically kicks off the Republican Revolution of 1910. What is the Republican Revolution of 1910, you say? It's essentially the end of King Manuel's ass. A 1910 edition of the Centralia Fireside Guard broke down the situation in a pretty neat bow. Quote, "The cause of the revolt is the outcome of a clash between the clericals and anti-clericals. The population of Portugal consists of about 300 aristocrats and 5 million common people, and for many years the aristocrats have been bleeding the people for every cent above their meager living expenses. Many of the poorer people were said to be actually starving. In the face of all of this, King Manuel II has been supporting the actress Mademoiselle Gaby Deslys in royal splendor, giving her jewels and sporting about the country with her. This was known over the country, and the people were oppressed by many other troubles, so the revolt followed. It is said that despite the fact that taxes were monstrous, that Portugal was debt-ridden and had more poverty than any other country on the globe, King Manuel II maintained 7 fine palaces." End quote. So while you can see that Portugal already had its own issues, this relationship with Gaby Deslys pours gasoline on this fire and helps to bring down the king. His romance with Gaby is the final straw that breaks the camel's back. On October 5th, 1910, Republican warships in the harbor open fire on the royal palace. The guns are trained on the building and shells are exploding overhead. Manuel and his mother, Queen Amélie, flee to the cellars. They hide in the underground vaults while the palace is being bombarded above them. At nightfall, the commander of a Brazilian warship sends word to the king, "Your life is in danger. I can get you out." The Republican commanders agree to let it happen. They don't want to kill him. They just want him gone. When the Brazilian officers arrive at the palace, they find Manuel trying to comfort his mother. She's in tears. At first, the king refuses to leave, but his mother's tears finally went out. So Manuel puts on his full uniform. He holds his head high, and he walks to the quay, where he boards the ship that will take him away from Portugal forever. King Manuel is overthrown and exiled. He has lost everything: his throne, his country, his crown. He's 20 years old. He will never set foot in his country again. And Gaby? She keeps the jewelry and moves on to the next conquest. She told King Manuel something like, "Oh, jeepers, babe, I really hate that for you. I mean, it really sucks to be you. Oh, well, I had fun. I guess I'll see you later. Unless I see you first." And she does see him again. One last humiliating time for the king. After his exile, Manuel becomes a frequent visitor to London. He travels incognito, staying at prominent hotels with the Marquis de Soverall, the former Portuguese minister, acting as his guardian. His mother, the queen, furnishes the money for these trips. He's literally like a child getting allowance. Manuel and the Marquis spend their nights in music halls and comedy theaters, sitting in inconspicuous stalls. Neither of them wears any insignia of rank. They're trying to hide. And they do a good job of it. They're rarely recognized. Then one night, in January 1911, while watching a performance of The Quaker Girl, Manuel spots Gaby Deslys in the audience. This is the first time he's seen her since losing his throne. If he'd had any sense or dignity, he would have ducked out of the theater and hid, but he rushes over and takes an empty seat next to the woman who wrecked his life.
His chit-chat goes from a warm conversation to Manuel slipping back into his old habit, or at least trying to. He's pressing his suit, begging her to return to him. And guess what? Gaby doesn't give a flying She is totally indifferent to his advances. She coldly keeps her eyes forward, watching the play, barely listening as the dethroned ruler pours out his love for her. While Manuel is still talking earnestly, Gaby rises from her seat. She adjusts her wraps, and she leaves the theater with a gesture making it clear that she does not want him to follow her. People who know the little chic dancer say that she told Manuel directly, since he is without home, rank, or money, she has lost all interest in him. Manuel immediately returns to Wood Norton, the home of the Duke of Orleans, where he and his mother are guests. And that was the last time that he saw the love of his life. Gaby moves on to her next man, but that is how she lives her life. It's what everyone else expects of her. Perhaps if the king had had a little more world experience and a little less time latched onto his mother, he would have known how to handle a woman like Gaby. Now, you've already heard about her affair with Harry and how he dethrones her for the next showgirl. One thing that Harry and the king have in common is a super close relationship with their mothers. But unlike the king, Harry has been around the block more than enough times when it comes to women. He understands Gaby, and honestly, they kind of deserve each other. They both understood each other and the nature of their transactional relationship very well. Harry's a hound dog. He's in it for the sex. Gaby's a mercenary. She's in it for the money. Neither one is in it for love. So when the relationship runs its course, Harry slowly closes his wallet and Gaby quickly closes her legs. Gaby quickly moves on to other wealthy men. The papers lead people to believe that one of those other men is her dancing partner, Harry Piltzer. News stories even go as far as to say that Gaby will marry him, but she won't. He's gay. By 1919, Gaby has accumulated a fortune. Her jewelry collection alone is worth over $1 million, thanks in huge part to King Manuel. She owns a lavish estate in the south of France, decorated with paintings by Botticelli and a gilded hand-carved bed. That was a gift from Harry Selfridge, one that he got some use out of too. But it's in the fall of 1919 that she contracts Spanish influenza. It leads to a throat infection. Then her doctors discover a tumor. They tell her that she needs surgery, actually multiple surgeries. But there's a catch that wouldn't be a catch to you or me or any person who wanted to be cured. To properly treat the infection, they need to make a cut on the surface of her neck. And Gaby says no. She refuses. She will not let them scar her beautiful neck. Her beauty is everything. It's how she got the king. It's how she got Harry. It's how she got everything. So she insists that they operate without cutting the outside. The surgeons do their best. She undergoes several operations. Now there's a saying that beauty is pain, but this is taking it too far. Gaby undergoes 2 of those surgeries with no anesthetic. But it's not enough to save her. As a result, on February 11th, 1920, Gaby Deslys died from complications of the throat infection. She was only 38 years old. And you see how she was remembered. The caption says it all. Popularly blamed for the downfall of King Manuel of Portugal. That was her legacy. And you think a person dies and that's it. End of story. But not for Gaby. There's just one more thing. She left her entire $1 million jewelry collection, including those diamonds and pearls from the King of Portugal, to the poor of Marseille. Do you think that she should have left the jewels to him, meaning the king, or his people, the poverty-stricken people of Portugal? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious about your thoughts on that. And in case you want to know what happened to the young exiled king, well, when he celebrated his 30th birthday, he was living a quiet life in England as a chicken farmer. Quite the fall from grace for a European king. It's probably not surprising to see that a woman who lived for beauty, money, and fame burned out rather young. If her priorities had been different, she might have gotten that surgery that would have left a scar on her neck and lived to a ripe old age. They say that beauty fades, but Gaby chose death instead. Gaby Deslys isn't the only woman in history whose death had something to do with surgery. While her cause of death was not getting a life-saving surgery, Great Depression era Doris Duke's choices to go crazy with elective surgeries, plastic surgery, facelifts in particular, helped to contribute to her death. I published a video about her roller coaster of a life that you can see here. Are you a content creator who feels like you're doing all the right things, but your channel still isn't growing the way you want it to? Are you making content but not making money? Or maybe you're a business owner who knows you need to be on YouTube, but you have no idea where to start? If that's you, I'd love to help. I have a membership called Hot Mess University where I teach creators how to actually build sustainable income on YouTube. Not just views, not just subscribers, but real revenue. The link is in the description box. And if you're serious, like serious, and you want to work with me one-on-one, send me an email. My email address is also in the description box. I work with content creators, and I'm also very interested in working with businesses who are ready to use YouTube strategically. Now let me tell you what's possible when you actually implement what I teach. Keisha Irvin is my YouTube colleague and friend. Her channel is Color Me Pink. When she first talked to me about her channel in 2022, she was making $2,500 a month on YouTube, and that's a really good side hustle income. We worked together at the end of January, and her very next check, February, was a little over $7,000. And here's the key. She implemented 90% of what I told her right away. She didn't sit on it, she did the work. And now, Keisha consistently earns between $9,000 to $12,000 on YouTube every single month. I actually interviewed her about her journey in my membership, and I uploaded that interview to my YouTube tips channel. I'll leave a link to that interview on the end screen so you can hear it straight from her and see her actual earnings. She opened up everything in that interview. So if you're still breathing, and I know you are because you're watching, it's not too late to do your thing. And if YouTube is your thing, consider checking out Hot Mess University or email me so that we can see if we're a good fit for one-on-one work. I look forward to working with you, and I'll see you on the next video. My sources for this story are on the screen.
Press and Sun Bulletin Archives, 1912. The Buffalo News Archives, 1912. Shadow of the Titanic, The Extraordinary Stories of Those Who Survived by Andrew Wilson. The Post-Star Archives, 1912. The Buffalo Times Archives, 1912 and 1919. Buffalo Courier Archives, 1912 and 1913. The New York Times Archives, 1913. The Baltimore Sun Archives, 1913. The Pittsburgh Press Archives, 1919. The New York Tribune Archives, 1919 and 1920. And the Courier Archives, 1946. Belmont Chronicle Archives, 1890. Case Western Reserve University at case.edu. Chicago Tribune Archives, 1904 and 1936. The Daily News Archives, 2009. The Knoxville Sentinel Archives, 1904. Kentucky Post and Times Star Archives, 1904. The Spokesman Review Archives, 1904. The Washington Post Archives, 1904. The Philadelphia Inquirer Archives, 1904. And El Reno Weekly Globe Archives, 1905. National Trust, United Kingdom. HistoryCollection.com. And the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston.